Hello and welcome to today's webinar with Liese Lord. Whilst this particular webinar is a late addition to our programme, it does form part of our growing online library, ranging from putting ventures under the spotlight in our Feet to the Fire series to more general investor knowledge. If you'd like to see our previous webinar recordings, you can do so by clicking onto the Stakeholders video library in the email you'll receive following today's event. You may have joined the webinar listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to use your phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Unfortunately, this morning GoToWebinar are having difficulties with their webcam software. Whilst you won't be able to see our speakers, you will of course be able to hear them. I'm sure many of you have specific questions relevant to the situation you now find yourself, your team and your business in. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's guest by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them either during or after the Q&A session. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the person who is putting the questions to Liese, Dermot Hill, Director of Stakeholders.
Hello and welcome everyone. It's a very interesting subject we have for you all this morning. And as Helen has said, it's outside our normal schedule, but I'm sure for everyone, highly topical. I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Stakeholders. We find equity funding for 300,000 to $1 million fundraisers. We specialize in the technology sector, but the big difference that we offer is access to senior executive talent. It comes in many forms. And it can help build out advisory boards, executive and non-executive teams. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn to our guest today, Liese Lord. Liese, thank you so much for joining us at relatively short notice. And please could you introduce yourself and give us some insight into the fantastic experience you have in this wonderful world of working from home. Over to you, Liese.
Thank you, Dermot, and thank you very much for inviting me. Delighted to be with you all. So I'm Liese Lord, and I'm founder and director of an organisation called the Lightbulb Tree, and we are working with businesses to help change the way of work for better for everybody. So what does that mean? That means that we're helping organisations to create more flexible ways of working that enable them to tap into great talent, both from a retention and attraction perspective, and help you make the most of people. We're helping organisations close the gender pay gap, we're helping them think about their costs, and we're helping their leaders and managers develop great behaviours and role modelling for the future of work, which ironically seems to be escalating by the day. So my experience is based on an HR and business leadership background, which goes back far too many years to mention. But I've been working in this space for over 10 years now as a fairly focused part of my portfolio, largely in my corporate life as a global HR director with a US multinational. And the catalyst there was relocating a European head office from Essex to Hertfordshire and having to take 500 people with me. We estimated a 50% loss. We reduced that to 1.5% with $1 million of savings, increased engagement and well-being, all through the right support and mechanisms, including remote and home working, as we're seeing people do today. So I'm hoping I can share some ideas, hints and tips that will help us all transition into a new way of working ahead. Thank you, Dermot.
Very good, Liese. Thank you so much. So let's start by turning to what rules apply to working from home. So, do you still have to take a lunch hour, for instance?
It's a really good question, and rules are something that we use to fall back on. Interestingly, most people that I've been speaking to don't actually have contracts of employment that enable them to ask their teams to work from home. So this is very much a working together approach. And I think that helps us shift our mindset into, we really want our people to do the best for our business. In terms of having breaks, absolutely we need breaks outside of the working time regulations, which in sort of encourages to do the minimum 20 minutes. I truly do support from a wellbeing perspective that people do take breaks, and probably a few more than they would have done in the office. this is going to be a very different working environment for many. In terms of other rules, it's more guidance and boundaries that I prefer, because helping people work with you on this in this way of working will get far more positive results. So it's helping people create boundaries. And we do that on a team basis. It actually helps spread the load and come up with a team charter, and helping people stay in a routine, switch on at the beginning of the day, switch off at the beginning of the day. But I think, as we'll talk later, Dermot, that the day could look quite differently for people going forward. In terms of other rules, there are some guidance regulations through health and safety and through HMRC, which I'd be very happy to share links to after the webinar.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. So how can small businesses use this change in working patterns to their advantage? We were talking about this before we came on air, and it seems from what you were saying, there are some really quite great and surprises due. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm really saddened that we've had this situation arise. I think it's important to put that first. However, yes, I think it will change the way that we work forever. And I think for small business particularly, and I was chatting with the Chambers of Commerce at their recent conference about this, and also my local Chamber of Commerce, for example, small businesses have an opportunity to really think differently about how they work. And the main output of that will be the ability to attract and retain really, really great talent. There are so many people out there that will offer you exactly the skills you need, maybe in a slightly different way. It could be, you know, I was talking to a business the other day that needed a new marketing director, but they knew they didn't need it full time. So we looked differently at job design. But there's also fabulous talent pools that you could tap into who are further away from your normal workplace because they don't have to be there. O2 Telefonica, when they changed the way of work for the 2012 Olympics, they were able to demonstrate that their talent pool increased by 60% geographically. So I think in terms of attracting great talent to help your business grow and thrive, that alone is going to be a phenomenal win for businesses.
Well, that is absolutely tremendous. And I must say that in stakeholders, we're very fortunate that we use home working a lot, and the productivity is amazing, and also their working routines are different. And I think you might come on to talk a bit more about that when people actually do the work a little later, maybe. Shall I move on? So what should we expect to happen to productivity using this home-based approach?
Yes, so when I work with organisations, we normally look at a 2 to 3 month, sometimes 4 month pilot period. I think that's been condensed into about 48 hours in most organisations. What you normally see is a slight dip in productivity as people get used to working in a different environment. It's not usually that bad. It's certainly significantly less than when you have a new person coming into the team and needs to get up to speed. But we have to allow for the fact that productivity may be slightly impacted. The more support we give, the faster that returns to where you expected it to be. But also, actually, the evidence is there that it increases. Productivity can increase when you work from home, particularly when people have good self-awareness and good structure to their day. Some of the statistics indicate that your productivity, you can get more hours out of people, principally because they're not commuting, but they can increase by sort of up to 1.4 days a month. Sure. Productivity, the hours that you're getting on a full-time individual, and productivity itself. I think some of the statistics that I've used in the past, at least a 17% gain. 86–87% of people themselves feel they're more productive, and 83% of managers feel their teams are more productive in a variety of surveys. So I think that demonstrates that if we can get through this initial settling in period and make that as condensed as possible, you should see productivity change. There is one caveat, which is home working today, literally, is a very different place to home working a month ago. And that's because many people will have others in the house with them that they might not have had previously, and they might have additional responsibilities, particularly if they have caring responsibilities, which I strongly advise we think differently about the working day and question ourselves, is 9 to 5 necessary? Because adopting something called time chunking, as a phrase I use, can really help people manage both their energy levels, their responsibilities, and their productivity really well. So I think that's something we need to bear in mind, Dermot. Thank you.
Very good. And I think that, again, stakeholders have seen the implications of that, and more people at home. And I think it's back to the employers to be flexible, but I think what will happen is in due course, they will get a big dividend from the goodwill that's worked through this current and very difficult time through and out the other side. And I think in some respects, again, we were talking about this before we went on air, that this could be very transformational for the economy. Did you want to quickly comment on, go on?
Sorry, comment quickly on that.
Do you want to quickly comment on the fact that this could be very transformational for the economy before we go on?
Yeah. Yes, I would. I'd love to, actually. I do think it would be incredibly transformational, because I think the thing that we were chatting about was a specific example could be the real estate impact and how we use space differently. Certainly, in my experience, both in the projects I led and the ones that I've supported my clients on, being able to use real estate space, and admittedly also in another role that I have where we invest in real estate, it's a different slant, but for employees to be able to work flexibly, and I think as we come through this, it won't be full-time home working, but it could be a blend of home working, co-location, working anywhere, anytime, anyhow type approach. I think there are considerable financial gains for organisations to consider around how do we use space, how much space do we need, what could we do differently, which would bring great returns for the businesses and also reduce some of the overhead costs.
That's very good. Well, thank you for that. How should employers measure productivity from home-based working activity?
Do you know, I think this has been the most asked question I've had in the last few weeks. It depends on how people are measuring productivity at the moment, and I think there are a number of us who have measured productivity by the time someone sat at the desk potentially. I think if we start to think about what do people need to deliver each week, month, and then into the quarter to achieve your business goals is really important. So working that backwards to weekly and sometimes daily goals, and thinking about what those measures could look like. Moving to an outcomes-based measure of productivity is absolutely the way to use home working effectively. Every day people can get up and they know what they need to deliver. And it will be a shift for some managers and leaders to move to that. And I always recommend as well that you have a start of the week, this is what we want to achieve, a check-in in the middle of the week, and a review at the end of the week and celebrate achievements. And that's particularly important where people are working away from each other at the moment. It's not so easy to necessarily reflect. We will need to help people reflect on the achievements. That's a separate measure to the communication I know that we'll be chatting about later. But I think measuring productivity needs to be very much focused on what do you need from people, quantify it as best you can, and help keep people focused on that through the week.
That's very good. I mean, we certainly run a series of sprints within stakeholders, which are very carefully defined projects, worked up with everybody that's involved in that particular sprint. It's written down, and then everybody goes to the delivery of it. And they prove particularly effective. You know, we're not all working together, but at the same time, we all know where we stand, and then we come back and review the sprints at the back end. What do we learn? What do we going to change going forward. Perfect, absolutely great stuff. Moving on then, what do you think managers can do to set a good example?
Oh, role model really well. Be authentic, and a word that isn't often used in leadership, which is show your vulnerability.
Yeah.
I was due to see Simon Sinek next month. I haven't heard for sure that it's cancelled. I'm pretty sure it is, but some of the current leadership thinking that's out there is, and Brené Brown's another great one. A phrase that I've used a lot in the last few weeks is courage is contagious. Ironically, yes. I think it is very much about, for once, we have to acknowledge that managers and leaders, we don't have all the answers, and that we need to pull on the collective brain power and ideas of our teams, share ideas, be confident and calm, and help step people through this, because people will be feeling some panic. I'm seeing a lot of that trending in different groups that I'm monitoring at the moment. But it's just being human and helping people know that they can talk to you if they need to. We will all have our own worries at the moment, and sharing is a good thing. If people can talk to you, then they can step it up to the next level and deal with it. But also make sure that as managers, you have your own support framework, whether it's you've got your own peer group or you've got a coach or whoever you've got. I think it's about showing that you're not afraid to seek help and advice and support, understanding that you're in this as well, and we're all learning together. It's a bit like being in one of those boats on the rapids, some of these whitewater rafting places, isn't it? You're all in it together, but somebody and you are the leader.
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of the things we've done internally is had a big review. So all we've done is during that meeting is look backwards at where we've come from, so what we've learned in the business, what we are measuring, and how we could measure it better. And if we can't measure it, how could we measure it? And really what we're doing is getting much closer to the dynamics of the business, what I call the heartbeat, so that we've actually got better control, and doesn't matter where we're working from, by taking that sort of forwards and backwards looking approach. We've actually come out of it with a stronger situation, and we're on the journey, but we're actually making quite a lot of headway. So I think it's managers, and I love the term vulnerability. My goodness, I'm forever trying to show mine, because I don't have all the answers, but I know my team collectively, and with all of us together in a group, online perhaps, we can actually come up with some absolutely fantastic decisions, providing we have, of course, the right inputs. Moving on then, tools. I mean, I think we've sort of touched on tools before we came on air, and there are a lot around. Are there any particular standout tools that you would recommend? We're using GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar in this case.
Yes.
Right there, what will comment on that?
There are so many tools, and there are loads coming out of this as we speak. I think build on what you already have, because people will be familiar and they'll be able to use that quite quickly. A lot of organizations are moving to Teams if they use Microsoft. GoToWebinar, I use Zoom. So ironically, most of my work is virtual. My coaching and a lot of my team development and everything is through Zoom. They've got a webinar capability as well. I think Skype for Business is sliding slowly down. For me, for tools to communicate, I would always use visual over verbal first, and then written in that order. FaceTime people, WhatsApp people, leave voice messages, just that using all of the different senses that we can use, because obviously there's a lot we can't use at the moment in terms of just sort of connecting closely with people. I think it's just about talking more with people, please don't default just to emails, because that can create a huge amount of overwhelm in people's minds depending on their personality type. But there are an absolute raft of tools out there. Again, I'm very happy to share some links to different things that people could think about using. Many of them are free, so it's not going to cost a fortune, but Slack's a very popular one. Making sure you've got cloud storage is another method of helping people communicate. Most people will have some solutions through their business continuity plans. But again, as I say, I'm very happy to share links to different tools and software that may be of use to you.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm just going to dip in at this stage and remind people you can actually post your questions online, and we will get back to you. So if specifically you're interested in some information around tools or anything else that we're discussing this morning, do come online via the keyboard and put your questions to us. The interesting thing is, actually, Lisa, I just actually run 9 interviews via FaceTime and Skype, and every time I said what's their preferred medium, and we went straight to that, and it's actually been very successful, and I did it in much less time, and I've obviously from that got the very good result that I was expecting. But it's getting face-to-face, given that we can't actually do the final thing in face-to-face. That's always my preferred option, because I've done a lot of interviewing in my time, but you know, we have to obviously cut our cloth in these times. So being engaged with FaceTime and Skype on a one-to-one basis is still a very effective medium. So do please keep your questions coming. Moving on then, what are the best tools to integrate and communicate with teams that have to work remotely? And I feel you've probably already touched on this, maybe.
We have, I think, and we've offered to share some tools and tips and hints.
Yeah, good. Let's move on then. Mental health awareness. There's a ton of that stuff around today. You know, being happy and healthy is both equally important. So mental health's a major factor. So when working at home, it is important. Would you like to comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. For me, this is one of the biggest things that we as leaders need to bear in mind. My experience of mental health with people working from home full time I've learned some hard lessons in the early days. People need to feel supported and connected. They need to feel that they have their team and company battery topped up regularly. When I first moved people from full-time office to full-time home working, and the managers hadn't quite connected with the need for communications, we saw a 50% increase in mental health issues. Very quickly retrieved. What I'd like to do is share that from the purpose of helping you make sure that doesn't happen with your teams. Mental health is top of the list, at the top of the list, I should say, not quite top. Even the BBC have sent a fantastic mental health link out as well. There's a number of organisations are sharing them. People will be feeling anxious, will be feeling really concerned at the moment. They're currently, staying at home, trapped with their entire family, which for some people would be heaven, for other people could be quite the opposite. And they'll be worrying about a lot of things, even if they try and keep calm on the surface. The little legs will be going full pelt in their brain underneath. So mental health awareness is really important. Encourage your teams not to have the news on 24/7. Just touch base maybe at the end of the day when we get the update from government. Just keeping them connected with the team, so having a daily face call of some description so that people know. Just chatting on a social level, not checking up with people, just checking in with people is really important versus checking up. just asking how people are and doing asking the question twice is a really good tip. You'll soon see, if you're on visual connection with people, you'll soon see a shift in body language if people are trying to deflect you. And there are services that we can point people in the direction of. You may have your own EAP system, employee assistance program, that you might use, or be able to tap in. Everybody will be slightly stretched at the moment in terms of those support structures, but there's a lot we can do just within our own companies to help our people. So please do be aware of mental health and how your people are feeling.
Oh, that's very good, thank you. I'd like actually to turn to a question raised by Deborah Price, and basically she's asking, is there an ideal length for webinars? And they're currently having to run a 90 to 120 minute session, which would have otherwise been a 3-day face-to-face workshop. And of course, that's turning it into a virtual delivery. So is 2 hours maximum for effectiveness? And indeed, should they, and when they supplement for offline activity and set up buddy groups for smaller work groups? I mean, I think she's very rightly saying, could we sort of plan out from the initial webinar, but do you want to comment on the ideal length of webinars?
I'm very happy to do that. I've been using sort of online training and webinars again for almost, well, yeah, 10 years now. And so the technology's come a long way. There's so many tools you can use within the online classrooms and webinar facilities, breakout spaces, whiteboards, post-it note facilities, shifting their cognitive function. But I think being very aware of making sure that people aren't distracted by other things that are going on, like email, helping them focus. The shorter you keep them, those sessions, the better. So my ideal is 45 to 60 minutes with a break. If you need to move on to do, I mean, 3 days training into 2 hours is quite intensive. What you don't want is that people don't actually take anything valuable away from it. So maybe break it into a series of 1 hour chunks, maybe a couple of times a day until you've delivered what you need to deliver. So it is possible, but I would keep it short to keep people's cognitive connection at its best.
Very good, thank you. And there's another question, in fact, from Sean Lask. Would you recommend any practical relaxation techniques to help employees deal with stress? A big area, I think. Over to you.
Yes. So we're going to cover physically active. Yes. So my advice on relaxation techniques, there are some great mindfulness apps that people can use. Headspace, Calm, there's a whole range. You have to find your own niche because they're all quite different. I personally have been using a self-hypnosis MP3 every evening from a coach that I follow called Jim 14. He's over in the States, but we all tap into different things. I have a mindset coach myself because I think it's an area that we all need to be strong in. So I think relaxation is important, and everybody will need to find their own way of relaxing. From simple things around, if you're using a laptop a lot, helping yourself physically release the tension of using a laptop by rolling your shoulders and moving your neck around, really important to avoid developing what I call laptop neck, which usually then requires a sports massage professional to help you release those bubble wrap knots in your neck. To actually stepping away from your workspace regularly, and again, I would say about 5 minutes every hour is really good, even if it's to make a drink or just walk outside, which is another really important thing to do every day. Where I am, we've got lovely weather, even in the rain. Just get outside at least twice a day if you can. Admittedly, it's not possible for everybody. In terms of other relaxation techniques, there are some phenomenal fitness people The body coach is doing a 9 o'clock in the morning session. There's yoga teachers are stepping up. Even if you just did the sun salutation sequence for yoga, that in itself is phenomenal. You can Google it on YouTube. That just really stretches you out. But physically active during home working is critical. Just get moving. I've also got friends who are have got online dance sessions in the evening where their families are just putting on some music, taking requests so they can all just dance around the kitchen. People are finding some really innovative ways to be physically active, and it is fundamental. It is proven to be good for our mental health to stay physically active. Thank you.
Okay, no, it's great. Well, I start my day at 7 o'clock in the morning with a walk or a run. And where I said I wasn't going to mention this in our preamble, I was out for a run with my 4-year-old grandson this morning. So he's up for it as well. Anyway.
What I am seeing is that there are a lot less people out at the moment. So I think you can, well, apart from dreadful pictures at the weekend, but I think we'll soon feel get out.
Yeah. Moving on. So how do you best create, or indeed, sorry, no, let's rephrase that. How do you create the best working environment?
Oh, this is another personal thing, isn't it? I think it's about having the right equipment to do your job and having a space with minimal distractions. For a lot of people, they may be in the fortunate position of having a separate room where they can step away and close the door. I'm one of those. I converted my summer house at the end of the garden into an office, so I trundle 100 feet away from the house, which is great. Other people may be able to use a corner of their spare room, perhaps, which is quite good. It's great to have a space that you can get up and walk away from, particularly at the end of the day. One of the big challenges of working from home is helping people switch off. The laptop seems to have this innate ability to be calling subconsciously, come and talk to me, if you don't walk away from it and close the lid. So if you can have an adjustable chair, that really does make a difference. If you are working at the kitchen table, as many will be, then make sure that you get up and stretch regularly and try and get the laptop lifted up. There are laptop risers that you can buy quite reasonably. I think there are a variety of brands. I've used a Jellyfish, it's called, before, which is about £20. At the moment, I've actually got my laptop raised up on a box with a separate keyboard and mouse. So that always helps to have that separate keyboard and mouse. An adjustable chair, as I say, a table or a desk. So the nice display screen equipment, compliant approach, but also thinking differently about how you work and where you work. So something that's quite popular is walking phone calls, where you walk around while you're on the phone if you don't need to take many notes or you don't need to be visual. That's quite good. It kills 2 birds with 1 stone because you're moving at the same time. And just thinking, where is going to be the best place for me to do this work? If you need distraction-free environment, then you need to get support to make sure that happens. If you are okay doing something and there's a little bit of background noise, then fine. One piece of advice, please don't turn the TV on. If you have music, make sure it's something that's not going to catch your attention too much, or constant access to the internet and watching various things is also quite distracting. So I think it's self-managing in that respect, and you can create a really good environment. Thank you.
You talked about time chunking, which I love the term. And now we're going to turn to how do you advise, when you're planning to do your, work planning at home, the time planning, how do you actually deliver that? And you mentioned, as I say, time chunking earlier. Interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so this is a technique I've used for many years, time chunking, and it was just a way. I know others use the phrase, but it's a way of balancing everything that you want to do and grouping activities to really maximize your productivity. And time is really precious to me, so I like to use it to best effect. So planning work at home, it literally is the night before, have a think about what you've got to achieve the next day, other things that you need to be doing and thinking about, and writing it down or putting it into your diary as entries, so that you can keep some sort of routine. Working at home can sometimes feel a bit like a holiday, but staying as close to your normal routine is quite good. My personal love about working from home is the fact that I gain a good 2 hours in the morning where I'm not commuting to clients or work. And that for me is my creative time. I've got to really understand my own, whether I'm a lark or an owl, and when I'm best for different tasks. So I will plan. If I'm writing reports or proposals, I might group those together. If I've got phone calls, I'll group those together. If I have email touch points, I'll put those at certain points in the day if I can, rather than being connected 100% of the time. So that's what I mean by time chunking. And every day thinking about those top 3 things you need to deliver and staying focused. Working at home, you do get a lot more distractions, you do get a lot more things taking you off to the side. It's not just the washing machine, it could be anything. And I think with so many people being at home at the moment, it's great because everybody's deliveries will go to the right house. Sometimes when I work in the house at the kitchen table, I used to be like delivery parcel centre point of the village, it felt like, which was a lot of interruptions. And for me, I do find it takes me a good few minutes to get back into the swing of things when I've been interrupted. So being conscious of what you need to do, the focus that you need to have, and finding the right environment to do it.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for that. So I'd like really to slightly change tack and talk about your own expertise. So, why would companies and employers turn to someone like you to make sure that remote working, the ability to desk share, hot desk, or shared space, why would they ever turn to someone like you to get this done? And, I can begin to imagine what your answer will be, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, why do they? Well, there's a full community of people like me, and people come from different backgrounds. My own personal background, as I've mentioned, is that of an HR and business leadership perspective, that somebody who's actually been there and made this change and embedded it. So I always like to connect with people who have done what I need to be done, and I like to offer that to people. And I think actually having someone slightly outside, particularly when they can be a coach, as I am, so not only share the experiences, be a sounding board, but actually help leaders step into the new behaviours that they need to adopt, and then safely guide them, their managers, their employees through the journey that they have ahead, turning it into as much of a positive experience as you can. I think that's definitely one of the things. We don't have all the answers because everything changes literally by the day. What we do bring is a lot of experience, fun where we can, and support, I think, is the main thing that I like to bring. I like to be a really positive partner in periods of change, and so that people can look back and say, yes, we've come from A to B. We may not have liked the reason why, but actually what we've come out with is hugely successful. And the reason that I did that, when I left corporate life, I was made redundant. Good part of my role was organisational design, and managed to design my job going to the States, and politely declined the offer to move with it. The great wins that I saw when we implemented flexible and agile working globally, because that was my final role, was leading this globally, was how it empowered people. Engagement. When we launched Flexible Agile Working in the UK, employee engagement went up 10 percentile points year on year for 3 years. Absence went down, productivity went up, revenue increased in a market that was declining, which was phenomenal for the time. And people started to think about work as a team rather than an individual. So they moved into from the all about me club, as I called it, to this team approach with team charters that help them think about how the team could deliver what the business need. And that made business continuity so much easier. And the organisation I was with became a globalised team structure, and they have found it relatively easy to transition to this full-time home working. So I think from a business continuity perspective, it's great. The other great win about that particular project was moving from a 14-acre site to 40,000 square feet, saving $44 million in refurbishment costs, but also $1 million in redundancy costs were saved. So I think there's lots of tangible costs that appeal to the CFO as much as the CEO and the MDs, but the people gains, which ultimately help you thrive as an organisation, are largely perception based but hugely successful. I mean, 87% of people thinking that working differently, working more flexibly helps them be more productive. That's an incredible number to be able to share, isn't it?
It certainly is. Very good. Well, Lisa, thank you so much indeed for your time this morning. It's been really interesting and enthralling indeed for us all, so much appreciated. So as many of you will picked up some invaluable tips and advice from this webinar, I'm hoping, and we're all hoping, that you'll be kind enough to forward the link that you're about to receive by email onto your friends and colleagues to give them the insight that you've gained this morning. So without any further ado, then it's an opportunity also for me to look forward to our next webinar on the 31st of March with Dr. Dragos Bratisnau, who actually has written a book called The Pursuit of Dreams. I've had a personal contact with him for over 12 months now. He is a remarkable individual. He's a space scientist from indeed Romania, worked at NASA and the space satellite program, and what he has achieved in his life, he has transferred into this fantastic book. And at the age of 35, if you all want to be completely wowed, beyond, of course, this morning, there is an opportunity for you to come online and learn more about his book then. So all of you, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Stay safe and enjoy the weather. Fortunately, we're in spring, so it's going to get better. I can be certain of that. And we look forward to hosting you again soon at one of our stakeholders webinars. Many thanks.
Thank you.